I was born in Paris, France, in March 1929, which makes me 90 years today. In addition, my father was very good in mathematics. He was able to use his mathematical perspicacity in investing on the stock market. Because he did that is really the reason why I can talk to you today. Because without the money that he was able to accumulate through these investments, it would not have been possible for our family, 5 of us, my parents, a sister and a brother, to escape Europe in time and to survive for 5 years when he could not earn a living for one reason or another. So it was a happenstance that turned out to be very good. We drove all the way from Lyon, where we had taken refuge because one of my father's manufacturers had its factory there. And they lent my mother a car and a driver, she didn't know how to drive, to drive us to Pau, which is in the southwest corner of France. The gas gauge didn't work, and the bottom of the gas tank, it turns out, was rusty. Because the state troopers, the gendarmes, were halting traffic, civilian traffic, so that the non-existent troop reinforcements could go through. My mother had decided we were going to do it by dead reckoning on second and third category roads. So we would be traveling on gravel roads or dirt roads. No maps for that, just dead reckoning. And that particular day, we were about halfway through our trip. We had taken a gravel road, and apparently a rock had punched a hole in the gas tank. Halfway down a hill, the car engine stopped. My mother found out that there was a smith, a blacksmith, about 3 miles down the road. So she said, "Henry, you go find a smith and see if he can fix this hole." So I started walking, and I was at a place where there were no houses, a few trees in the background, a wheat field on the left, a pasture on the right, and all of a sudden this Messerschmitt 109 fighter pilot saw me. I was the only person in view. So he thought he'd have a little fun, and he started to strafe me. He missed on the left, and so he turned around. I figured he was coming down the other side, so I stayed in the bottom of the ditch, and he missed me the second time on the right, at which point I decided to roll up out of the ditch. Sure enough, the third time he hit the middle of the ditch. And then he had had enough fun and left. So one remembers these kinds of things. I was 11 and a half. He was north of France in Amiens. He and 49 or so, 50 others, started walking, and they walked south. And my father walked 550 miles in 14 days and nights. 50 of them started out. By the time the armistice was signed on June 19, there were just 2 of them left. So we did reconnect then in Vichy, France, in Nîmes. And we stayed in Nîmes for 1 year. When I went to the lycée there, the secondary school, I was in the 5th grade, which is the second year of secondary schooling. And then my parents decided to put more distance between us and the Germans, and we went and lived in Algiers for a year. to November 1941. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a weekday, a Wednesday, I'm in math class. Somebody comes, knocks on the door, and points to me and says, "You're wanted in the principal's office." I got out, went to the principal's office, at which point I was handed out a very impolitely worded notice. "You are not acceptable in this school anymore. You have committed a horrible crime. You are Jewish." And so I was expelled from school. The next morning, my mother took me by the wrist and forced me to go with her. We took the trolley down the hill to go to the lycée, and she barged into the principal's office without an appointment. Terrible breach of etiquette of the day. And she pounded on his desk, and she said, "I want you to give me a document that says why you expelled my son, the son of a veteran of the French army." And so I do still have in my possession this document, which says that my conduct had been good, my work had been very satisfactory, but I had committed this terrible crime of being Jewish. I don't know when my parents, especially at the urging of my mother, decided to try to get out of Europe. I do not know that. This was against the reluctance of my father and the desires of her father, my grandfather. It had cost us $500 for each of the visas for my parents, my sister. And the Cubans were very nice. They threw the baby in for free. So they didn't have to pay $500 for him. And then it turns out that in order to get the paperwork that we needed, we had to go back to Marseille. We ran to the Spanish consulate. They had just closed. Come back the next day. So we come back the next day. And that night, Francisco Franco, the dictator of Spain, a great buddy of Adolf Hitler, had promised Adolf that he would close the borders. And so we couldn't go through Spain to get to Portugal, to the ship. Well, not to coin a pun, there were a lot of other people in the same boat in Marseille. And so the Portuguese decided to reroute the ship and have it stop in Casablanca. So there we were in Marseille. We had just come across the Mediterranean from Algiers, and we went back across the Mediterranean to take a rickety old train from Oran to Casablanca. We were held behind barbed wire 10 miles north of Casablanca. All the people that were going to get on that ship were taken off the train by the French police and put behind barbed wire right on the beach. My father was able to bribe a little boy with some cigarettes to get word out to a friend of his in Casablanca who knew the chief of police, and said, "You're going to get the French citizens out of here, the veterans." And so we only stayed about a week in that camp. And then we get to Casablanca, and the ship, the SS Niassa, was supposed to come tomorrow. And tomorrow it was supposed to come mañana, and so on for several weeks. But eventually we got on the ship on the 29th of January, 1942. We had been able to leave France, Marseille, the first week of January 1942, which was a very good thing. That if we had been in Marseille the second week of January, we would not have been allowed to leave. The frontiers had been closed by Pétain, Hitler's buddy, in Vichy. So it was just one of those fortuitous things that we left the first week of January 42. About 3 days out, once we got on the ship, we got stopped by a U-boat. Came out of the water at 9 in the morning, and 2 rowboats full of German sailors inspected the ship from top to bottom. They didn't find anything, so they let us go on. And then we got to Bermuda for British control. And at that point, the ship captain either had bad charts or didn't know how to read them, but he ended up with putting his ship on top of a sandbar in the middle of the harbor. So the ship stood there for over a week until a high tide finally floated us off. And then we went on and went to Havana. I ended up then spending 3.5 years in Havana. Went to school, in the morning classes in English, in the afternoon classes in Spanish, and I was fluent in French. So the first few months were a little tough. Eventually got immigration visas to get to the United States. I think it is extremely important that people, adults and children, know what happened so that hopefully it will not be repeated. The German barbarity of those years should not be forgotten. Never forget and remember what happened between 1933 and 1945.